Good morning. How's it going? I am from the Montana World Affairs Council, and I am the development director for them. And I'm pleased to introduce our first Council in the Classroom speaker of the year, Karolo Aparicio. He is from EcoViva and is the executive director for EcoViva and has over 15 years of experience working on social and environmental causes. Before I introduce him, I want to thank our generous sponsors. As you can see, the Washington Foundation, Trails West Bank, Northwestern Energy, and Neptune Aviation for their generous sponsor of this classroom in the Council in the Classroom. Without further wait, I will introduce Karolo Aparicio.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. I really appreciate it. Hey everyone, how is everyone? Everything all at once. Anyway, I'm really happy to be here with all of you. But before starting this discussion, this presentation, just wanted to thank the Montana World Affairs Council for this opportunity, as well as the Inspired Classroom. So thank you so much for this opportunity to essentially do some show and tell today, but have this also be a participatory exercise. So yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity, for this conversation, to talk about some of the effects around water scarcity and food insecurity, as well as some of the implications about this issue, and then some reflections on some community-based initiatives that are in place to do something about this really daunting problem. So before addressing the topic around food insecurity and water scarcity and even migration patterns and steps that local people are taking to address this problem, I just wanted to introduce you to the organization that I work with. So I'm kind of standing in front of, oops, there we go. It's backwards. So before addressing this topic, I just want to talk to you a little bit more about my organization. So EcoViva is an organization that supports environmental sustainability initiatives, social justice, and peace in communities in Central America. So one of the things that's different about our organization is that we don't employ the sort of top-down approach where we think that we have all of the solutions because of technical know-how or the fact that we come from the U.S. or whatever. We don't have this preconception. So what we do is we work with the leadership and partnership of communities in Central America, because we understand that they have an understanding of what the local problems happen to be, and also some insights into what those solutions are. And our role is then to sort of play matchmaker between resources that we might have access to, such as funds, and skills where there might be some sort of a gap. But before I talk some ears off in this presentation, what I want to do is I want to hear from some of you, and I'd like to get an idea of who's in the room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and I'm going to ask you to pick a couple of spokespeople from each of the schools. So talk amongst yourselves for a little while, and maybe pick two people from each classroom, and we're going to address two questions. So where are you joining us from? Well, obviously I can kind of see that on screen, but I kind of want to hear it from you. And what's unique about the place where you live? So if you were going to have someone visit your town, what would you like them to know about it? So I'll leave you with the decision making around who your two spokespeople are going to be, and when you're ready, just raise two hands.
How about we give you 47 seconds to come up with that.
47.
So, 47.
Wow. Okay.
So go ahead, turn talk, generate some ideas, and then be ready to share.
I'm going to have some coffee for
47 seconds. 37 seconds.
Me and Mel Pal could do.
Okay, you and Mel Pal.
All right, what do you want us to say?
What do you want to say?
We are from Three Forks.
No.
What? Don't confuse
47
me.
seconds.
Okay.
What's unique
Three
about
Forks and Chinook, can I
Small
remind
but
you to go
moderate
ahead and hit that
phosphorus.
mute button on your microphone? Perfect. Thanks. All right, we've got about 15 seconds left. And I would actually say that Chinook looks like they are ready to speak. So if you want to unmute and go ahead and answer those questions, you can also introduce yourselves.
Mute up.
Yep, Chinook.
Okay, I'm going to stand way over here.
Go ahead, Chinook. Oop. And they left for some reason. Let's go to... how about we go to Three Forks? Let's start with Three Forks.
All right, guys.
Alright, so we're from Three Forks, Montana.
Three Forks is kind of known among the students for being small but really modern and prosperous. We have lots of really awesome teachers and lots of technology in every classroom.
That's cool.
Super cool. Thank you.
All right, what spokesperson number 2?
Is there another spokesperson from Chinook to say something? Whoa.
Is good.
What's going on?
Okay, let's go ahead and move down to... How about Stanford? I see Stanford has some hands raised.
Okay, so we're from Stanford, Montana.
Probably the most unique fact about Stanford is that it takes 3 also small schools to actually make up a sports team, yes. And we have more cattle than people around this area.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you, Stanford. How about Great Falls?
Alright, so we asked those questions.
I couldn't hear you.
Do
What
you
was
think
that?
about it? Oh my god. We're from Great Falls, and what's unique about this place that we live in is that it's very like, I don't know, like everybody lives out of town most of the time. I don't know.
Sierra.
Yeah.
Wait, what part of the state is it in?
Sierra. Go.
So it's in like the middle of the state, and with our school, our school is about sports, and we are really heavy on Western art history, which I bet everybody in Montana is, but we really respect Sam Russell as a person. And our city is separated in between the river, the Missouri River, which goes straight through Great Falls. So it's great.
Awesome. Okay. Let's see. I think, Freud, is that you up there? So we are just introducing where you're from and what's unique about where you live. So let's see, Freud, we can't hear you.
I'm trying.
Just bear with us. All right.
Okay, now we can hear you.
We're very unique because we have good teachers and good sports teams. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Awesome. What kind of sports?
Hockey, football, soccer, baseball.
Right, so a bunch of sports. Wonderful.
Yeah,
All right.
It's really nice to meet all of you, and it's great to understand a little bit more about the schools that you attend and the places that you live in. So I really appreciate that. So just to tell you a little bit about my organization and where we happen to work. So my organization, Ecoviva, like I said, we're dedicated to the development of the rural economy and the promotion of dignified livelihoods and environmental sustainability. So I mentioned a little bit about our approach, how we take our leadership from the grassroots, because they have a deeper understanding of what the needs are for the communities, and also for the solutions. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea as to the geographic region of where we operate, and I'm so going to get it backwards as to which way I'm supposed to turn to point. Ah, I didn't. Okay. So we operate in El Salvador. Nope. There we go. Honduras. We have some partnerships also in Nicaragua, and also in Panama. Wow, I got the pointing okay.
That was really good. It's harder than it looks, everyone.
It really is.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're active in all of these countries around these issues that I mentioned a little while ago. But where we really focus, and let's drill down a little bit more, we are most active and we have the longest and deepest relationships in El Salvador, which is the smallest country in Central America. And more specifically, we work in this place called the Department of Usulután. El Salvador, like the United States, is subdivided into smaller political and administrative units. So what we call states in El Salvador, they refer to those as departments. So we work in and around the Department of Usulután, and you can see it. Yep, right. Yep. Wait, right there. In and around this. So if you can see some of the blue under that dot that represents Usulután, you see this inlet, and that's a bay. That's the Bay of Jiquilisco. And it's a bay that's a very critical sort of ecosystem. It's known for an immense array of biodiversity, so including lots of different types of crabs and shellfish. There's 4 different species of sea turtles that nest there, including some really rare and endangered species. One of those being the eastern Pacific hawksbill. So we have these really long and deep relationships with community organizers in the region. So I mentioned a little bit more about how we support these initiatives in Central America. So by resource mobilization, what we mean essentially is fundraising. We help connect the communities with funds that they need to develop their projects. We also play matchmaker in terms of technical assistance. So for instance, for specific projects, they might need people like engineers, hydrologists, or water experts. They might need people who have specific knowledge around business planning and that sort of thing. So we connect the communities and people who have very specific skills. And I overheard some folks talk about art. We've even brokered partnerships with communities and artists for youth development activities and the arts.
I'm pushing you back on screen. There you
Okay,
go.
thank you. And of course, advocacy issues. So we work to amplify the voice of our partners so that they can be heard in the context around decision makers and decision makers and policy makers around environmental, social, and economic issues. So just to give you a little bit of context of where we're operating. So El Salvador, you may or may not know, they went through a long civil war back in between 1979 and 1992. There was a brutal civil war in El Salvador, and it was one of these wars, as so many of them are, that was characterized by human rights abuses and large-scale displacement of people. So whole communities were driven into exile during this war. So at the end of the conflict in 1992, with the signing of the peace accords, some of the communities that had been living in exile in Panama, they settled back into the region, and they settled into the Bay of Jiquilisco, which was that region that I mentioned a little while ago. And people who those people who'd been living in exile in Panama, they had sympathies with one of the factions from the armed conflict. There were people who belonged to the government side, the military, during the armed conflict, and they were also resettled in the region. So one of the things that had to happen was, even though there was a formal signing of the peace accords, you had people who'd been on opposite sides of a civil war living next door to each other as neighbors. So they had to go through peace building and peace building exercises and peace building processes, and that was the origin of the organization that I work with that helped broker some of these conversations. One of the issues that also really brought people together, though, was Mother Nature herself, if you will. So this area is really vulnerable to tropical storms. So this is a pretty major catastrophe that happened back in 1998, Hurricane Mitch. And one of the things that this did was it made people in the region realize that they were all living together in a very vulnerable environment, and they had to come together around issues of disaster preparedness, and to some degree also disaster prevention in their communities, and an understanding of these dynamics around natural disasters.
So I just want to pause really quickly and just bring this home. Most of you, probably none of you, were born in 1988 or 1998. Was anybody born in 1998?
Maybe some of the
Right. And so, thinking about that, but thinking about today, we've had again an absolutely horrendous hurricane season, with first Hurricane Harvey, and then was it Ivan? Irma, excuse me. And then Maria. And so I want you to think about some of the news, the images that you have seen as he's going through this. The images that you have seen from Texas and Puerto Rico and St. Thomas and Florida, just to give yourself an idea of maybe what happened in this part of the world in 1998.
Yeah. So actually, why don't I hear from you? And what sorts of images have you been seeing in the news or on online or that sort of thing? And what do you think is going through people's minds as they face these natural disasters in Florida, Texas, and Puerto Rico, and different islands in the Caribbean?
Absolutely. Stanford, let's start with you.
Yes.
So we, every morning for history class, we watch CNN Student News, and it has been really graphic with all of the hurricanes and saying that this is one of the worst hurricane seasons that we have endured in the U.S. history. So, yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. Do any of the other schools watch the CNN Kids News or CNN 10? Let's see, is that Great Falls? I may be seeing some hands. Yeah, let's go over to Three Forks. What about you?
So as Montana knows that we've been on fire for the past couple months of the summer. Yeah. So it seems like half the country's on fire and half the country is just getting water. So it's just cool to kind of see that. But how different the natural disasters are.
Absolutely. Great Falls?
So we have realized how much destruction and how much devastation there has been throughout the world, considering with the fires and the floods and everything that has been happening with all of the hurricanes. And it's mostly just an eye-opener to realize what actually happens around the United States and even the world.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Troy, do you want to chime in? What's going on there?
Hi. I think we got disconnected.
Okay.
Oh, yep. And
Hi
there we go. We have Chinook. Welcome back, Chinook.
Welcome back.
I'm glad you're back. Okay, so we were just hearing from Freud. Freud, I'm sorry, we missed that. Would you repeat that?
You want to in classrooms like Stanford does and stuff, and images that
So we're gonna have to be really loud, but definitely I think I heard how destructive water can be, and there's been a lot of flooding also associated with these these hurricanes. Yeah. Well, they just popped in. We're gonna move past. Yeah. Well, Chinook, we'll get you this on the next time. You're the first to answer the next question. Okay.
Okay.
So there.
So anyway, by the time the next sort of extreme weather event took place, this was back in 2011. There was an extreme weather event called Tropical Depression 12E. The communities were already pretty well organized at that point, and established emergency response protocols, and had protocols to be able to evacuate people up to higher ground. And one of the things that they learned from this entire experience was that coordination between community members, grassroots activists, community groups, and government institutions, that sort of cooperation and coordination really helped save lives. And in this area where they were organized at that level, there were no fatalities during that one extreme weather event. So I think there's a very powerful lesson that can be learned there. So given the vulnerability to natural disasters, disaster preparedness right now continues to be one of the principal activities with the groups that we partner with in El Salvador. Now, the flip side of the coin of these sorts of extreme weather events, and one of the students brought up the fact that here in Montana you've had fires. We've also had fires in Oregon and in California and Washington State, whereas on the other side of the country, you've had extreme weather events having to do with tropical storm, with hurricanes. So the flip side of this sort of extreme weather event in the region is drought, and I think this is going to get a little bit closer to the theme that we're going to talk about, which is around water and water scarcity. So, like I said, just like the region is vulnerable to tropical storms, it's also really vulnerable to drought.
I'm curious, just a show of hands. How many of you have experienced drought in your community or been affected by drought?
Wow. So what's it like? I see a lot of hands in.
So in Stanford, I think they were the first. Stanford, do you want to just quickly share that experience?
Yeah. Go for it. Talk about it. I'll do it. Okay. All right. Well, a lot of the drought here just kind of comes from. We don't normally get a ton of rainfall here, which doesn't help, and with all the crops that people grow, it's not the best idea to irrigate them either with no local water source that can cover the whole field. So there's not a lot that you can do about it, so the soil just dries out, and then you reach the point where it's a drought, and then it's flying up everywhere, and yeah, everything's just dry.
What kind of crops are they?
Wheat.
Wheat, barley, peas, hay, and corn. Like we do many crops, and like as we're on like the little belts, and so it's harder for the rain cloud to get over the mountains with the rain still, and so it almost gets over the mountains, but we don't get as much rain. As on, like, the west side.
So it's a rain shadow, yeah. Now there's a similar situation in Central America whereas you all might have a rain shadow. In Central America, there's something that's referred to as the dry corridor. So one side of the isthmus gets a lot more rainfall than the other. So it's not one of these things that's equally distributed. So there's more vulnerability to drought. Mm-hmm. So I saw some other hands in one of the other classrooms. Want to hear about your experiences?
Let's see, Chinook. I see some hands down there. Go ahead, Chinook.
Okay, go ahead. We have a big drought out here because we didn't have much rain this year and it got really bad We have a river called the Milk River coming through our town, and this year it's been really low, and all of our reservoirs here have been really low, and by the time this rain came this year, it was too late. The grass was too dead to grow back. So next year, hopefully, we'll have more rain.
Wow. Anybody else?
So for those of us who farm wheat here in Chinook, Montana, it was really horrible because some of us can't pull out of the river, and if everyone pulled out, the river would be dry. So the rain didn't come until everything was dead, like he said. So it was bad.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what was the effect on people? I mean, how did people feel? How did people respond? What did people do when all of this happened?
What about you guys that farm? How did it affect your family?
Well, like, all of our alfalfa, all that stuff is like, there's like an inch of it now. All like, because we're on like the top of the hill and it all comes from rain. And like, there's no irrigation up there.
It was bad because then like all the crop was gone, and for some of us that's one of the main ways we make money. And without some of that money, we aren't able to pay some stuff and get stuff done that needs to be done.
Yeah. So there's a lot in common between the way that drought is experienced in Montana and the way that droughts are experienced in Central America. I mean, you see the same sort of thing: crops being lost, and a loss of income and jobs for people. You in the red plaid shirt. Yeah. I see that. Yeah, it looks like you got something to say.
So, yeah, we didn't have any rain, and it was bad for our grass, and the farmers, our cows need all that grass and the water, so this drought didn't really help our cows. So if our cows can't eat any of the grass and gain weight for us to sell, we can't make hardly any money, and so we need the rain for our grass to get our cows heavy enough to sell for a good chunk of money.
Yeah.
So just out of curiosity, with a show of hands, similar in other areas around Montana and other schools? Yes for thumbs up for similar, thumbs down for not. Yeah.
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 Yeah. No, I mean this is something that's a problem that we share. As humanity.
So just as a quick time check, we only have about 15 minutes left. So
wow. one of the things that arguably is we're all so folks in Central America and folks here we're going through
we have about a half hour left.
A water crisis. So what do we mean by water crisis? I mean, what are some definitions that we can think of? So maybe just two people could.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Comment on
that. I see a hand, and we're going to go with Three Forks and Freud for this one. So, Freud, I see a hand right for you right now.
Just like too much water in that area.
Okay, nice and loud. One more time. Yeah.
Like
say it again.
Flooding and more water than is needed in that area.
I'm actually okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let's think about it. Let's hear another one.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to Three Forks.
We think water crisis means is like when you don't have drinkable water, like either you're going through a drought or like your water is contaminated. So.
Exactly. Yeah, that's one of the clearest definitions. It's when there isn't enough potable water, so water for human consumption for a given population. So that's just one of the working definitions.
There we go.
So what do you think some of the factors are that can contribute to the possibility of a water crisis happening?
Yeah. This time we're going to have Great Falls and Stanford answer this question. So let's start in Great Falls. Great Falls, you're still muted. There you go.
So, some of the factors that we have when we're being cut off of our water resources is when we don't get enough rain or we're not able to take it out of the river and supply water to our crops, because then that just ruins all of our chances for a good year for agriculture. And yeah, that's all I have.
Yep. No, that's great. That's great.
Good. Stanford, how about you?
Alright, so like a lot of the problem might be that you've overused it to the point where there's not enough to supply water to everyone and everything that needs it. So if you use it to the point where there's not enough of it, then you're obviously going to have a problem in the fact that not everything can be watered, plants start dying or people do, and obviously that might have been a little grotesque, I'm sorry. But yeah. So the obvious choice is going to be the people one, to save them, not to save the plants.
So yeah, I mean those are all really important factors. So one of the some of the other factors that are involved in providing or in creating this situation of water scarcity is deforestation. So forests are absolutely important for the recharging of aquifers, underground sources of water. And this is a really important factor, especially important factor in places like El Salvador, where about 90% of their forests have been chopped down. Another factor that goes into water scarcity is sometimes there aren't rules of the road that are really clear about how water can be distributed fairly and equitably across its population. So in places like El Salvador, there aren't really adequate water laws just yet. So you can wind up with situations where, on one part of the country you have golf course owners and bottling companies that are drawing a lot of water for not a lot of money, and in the neighboring community, you might have people who are poor, who don't have any access to water at all, or it's really very expensive. It has to be trucked in, or they need to use bottled water, or they use water from contaminated sources. So there's also the problem of rules and how water can be distributed in a way that's fair and equitable. So we've already talked a little bit about water insecurity and what some of the problems around agricultural production are, and I don't think we need to revisit that point. I think that all of you, you shared some really great insights into what that's like in your community, and there's just so much in common with how that experience is lived in Central America too. So one of the things that I do want to point out is that what's come out of this water crisis is that the water crisis exacerbates the problem around food security and being able to grow your own food. It drives rural people deeper into poverty in the region, and there's a study that just came out that shows that there's a connection between an uptick in violence and violent crime, and also migration, and all of this having some relationship to drought and water insecurity. So we already talked a little bit about contamination and contaminated water sources. This is a real problem in El Salvador. There's been some studies that have shown that about 88% of the country's surface water is highly contaminated. This is a little bit of an extreme example of some of this water contamination. Yeah, trust me, there's water somewhere in there.
Yeah, what is going on?
What's going on? So there was a molasses processing plant that had a spill. One of the operators of this installation, they cut some corners around safety issues in order to make more profits. And by cutting these corners, they had an accident. And all of these molasses just spilled into one of the rivers, into this river called the Magdalena River in El Salvador, and just made this horrible, disgusting, goopy mess killing thousands of fish, costing hundreds of thousands of dollars to clean up. The result of this is that the company wound up getting sued by the government to clean up the damage done to the river. No, it was really quite terrible. So the other issue, of course, is around the aquifers that I mentioned. So there's the real danger of drawing way too much water from underground sources when you run into the problem of not enough rainfall. So it's kind of like you've got a checking account and you've got a savings account. So if you can imagine your checking account being the sources of water like rivers and lakes and that sort of thing, surface water, but when you don't have enough in your checking account, well, what do? You dip into your savings, and that savings is the aquifers. Well, eventually, if you keep doing that, you're going to run out of savings, and that's really dangerous. And that's kind of the same situation that's going on with water around the sources that are underground in the aquifers. So what can be done about addressing some of these issues? And I kind of want to hear from some of you all as to what's going on in the places where you live to address the problem of water scarcity.
Yeah. Let's just take a couple of minutes to turn and talk to your neighbors, and then we'll choose a spokesperson from each school. So we'll take 49 seconds this time.
Use those extra 2 seconds wisely.
Yes, very wisely. Okay, about 10 seconds left. And I'm going to start in Freud this time. All right. So, Freud, go ahead when you're ready.
Irrigation.
Irrigation.
Irrigation,
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, that's great. How about Chinook?
Well, this year we shut off our irrigation early because some cows were drinking the irrigation ditch because we didn't have much water, and then the cows were dying, and also we just didn't have enough water to support all the ranchers and farmers around with the water, so we had to shut it off early this year.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Okay. My goodness. How about Stanford?
There we go.
So usually our town puts on water restrictions, but this year we came to our water restrictions a whole lot earlier, like a month earlier. And then probably in the middle of July, there was another restriction that we could only hand water our lawns.
How about Three Forks? Three Forks, how about you?
Go, John.
Living in western Montana, we have a system, because we're not as affected by the drought as, say, eastern Montana, but we have a system, and essentially in everyone's homes there's a water meter. And basically what this water meter does is it limits the amount of water we can use by, once we hit a certain usage, it bumps up the price per, I don't know how they measure it, per gallon or whatever, and that deters people from using more water than what they're technically supposed to use.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really cool. I want to look into that
That's
and see
really
if we have that in
interesting.
Missoula. I don't know. That's fantastic. Okay, let me think. Great Falls. How about you?
We have water restrictions. We can only water our lawns on certain days of the week.
And the water restrictions have gotten worse because with all the fires, they have to take water from the lakes and rivers to use that, so we don't have as much to use in our homes.
Yeah. So I just want to say that those are some of the practices that are also used in Central America, with I think possibly the exception of the tiered pricing around consumption. I've seen that in other places, and how that's an effective pricing can be a good way of addressing the issue. So yeah, those are all solutions that are applied. So some of the other solutions that we've seen in Central America are around soil conservation and water efficiency practices and agroforestry. So one of the issues that I mentioned a little while ago was the fact that the aquifers aren't recharging, and they're not recharging fast enough. Well, to address that root cause, they're replanting trees where previously the trees had been clear cut. They're replanting trees so that the aquifers have a chance to recharge. So that's a more forward-looking approach to addressing not just the current water crisis, but future ones that are going to come down the pike. So yeah, these are just some studies that are done around water quality issues and pollution. So that's a whole other way that that folks can help address the water crisis, is by reducing pollution into rivers, streams, and lakes. Another approach is through restoring ecosystems, and I already mentioned this about the forests that are used to recharge aquifers, but also farther downstream in El Salvador, there's these forests called mangrove forests. So these are the forests that live in the bay, and it's around a mixture of saltwater and freshwater. They have a really dense root system, but they rely on this intricate balance between having enough fresh water and salt water. But the way that they act is they act as filters for pollutants that might be coming from the ocean and filter upstream. But this dense network of roots from mangrove trees actually stops a lot of these harmful elements from reaching sources farther upstream. So it's important to have healthy forests as part of your water conservation and avoiding water crises. So I already mentioned some of the reduction of pollution. So this small creek over here, it was polluted by mining activities in El Salvador. And interestingly enough, the whole country of El Salvador, they banned metallic mining. They made mining illegal. They went through a process where they realized that the gold that could be extracted, the jobs that could be created, on balance, it didn't square with how with water quality and the fact that everyone needs water to drink, for farming, for all sorts of other human activities. And the cost of mining just far outweighed, the benefit that water can provide. So they came to a national consensus and decided that mining really wasn't an activity that should take place within that country. So that's kind of an extreme, but in my opinion, a very, very clever solution to a problem. And as with everything, there's trade-offs. And there's also the ongoing national debate as to whether water should be seen as a private commodity that's given a price and responds to the market. And on the other hand, there's the point of view that water should be a fundamental human right, that everyone has a right to it, and it's up to society and the regulations and regulatory practices to come up with a fair and equitable way of distributing that. This is a colleague of mine from one of the organizations that we partner with at a press conference where he's advocating for the idea of thinking about water as a fundamental human right. Regardless of which route the country takes, it'll be different to what the status quo is, where there's this complete patchwork of regulations that don't necessarily agree with each other. And what's happening is that there's some interests that are drawing way more water than they should, and leaving some people out. But while this whole debate is going on about whether it's privatization or whether water is a fundamental human right, one of the things that we're doing is we're applying local solutions also, so that some of the more vulnerable communities are able to have access to water. So this is a project that we did to install some solar panels for an irrigation pump, a solar-powered irrigation pump, so that people could draw water using clean, sustainable energy. We've also worked on, here's another shot of those irrigation systems. And we've also worked in partnership with groups like the Engineers Without Borders and the Rotary Club to install these water storage tanks that can help people during dry periods. So this tank supplies enough water for about 500 people in a community that previously didn't have access to water. And we've also worked with communities to plant home gardens that have a sort of diversified array of crops, and some that are drought resistant, others that are flood resistant. So that's what we're working on. We're working towards solutions that'll help people have access to clean, safe, reliable water supplies that leads to food improvement, and hopefully to healthier people and eventually a more peaceful society.
Can I pop on
Yeah,
really quick?
please do.
So many of you over the next few weeks are going to be looking at the idea of a global water crisis and how it affects our local communities. And so this is a really good introduction sort of to some of the things that are happening, and to see that there are real similarities around the world, that Montana isn't unique in what we're experiencing, and maybe we can learn from some of these other ones. And so we only have a few more minutes left, and I would love to open it up for any questions that you might have for Karolo this morning, excuse me. It's only morning. So we're going to go ahead, and I'd like to start with Three Forks, and we're just going to work our way around with some questions.
That sounds
If
great.
that
Yeah,
sounds
absolutely.
good. Okay, so I'll turn it over. Three Forks, do you have any questions for Karolo?
Ask them.
What can we locally do to help them there, do you think?
Yeah, there's one of the things that we do is we broker exchanges between volunteers, who maybe have a certain set of skills, like engineers, like hydrologists, like planners, and those sorts of skills. And they come and they help us with the technical aspects of building some of these water tanks, or installing these solar panels for pumps. So that's one of the things that folks in the U.S. have been able to do to help with some of these development projects in places like El Salvador. So what I suggest is, what grade are you in right now?
Juniors.
Junior in high school. I mean, think about what your career path is going to look like. Think about what options are open to you, and consider service and what that's going to look like, and how your skills are going to help people not only locally, but also maybe thinking internationally, and where those skills can apply. So the world is open to you right now in terms of educational opportunities, and where it can best serve to address some of these issues.
I would also wonder if just learning, and maybe even
Absolutely.
connecting with your organization, and maybe even some of the people or the schools that you work with that are in El Salvador, to just learn about each other and find out where are the similarities between problems that are happening in El Salvador and things that are happening in Montana, and just sharing ideas.
Absolutely, and I think some really deep commonalities have come out of this discussion. I mean, just listening to you and some of the problems around lack of water and what the implications are for agriculture, it seems like there's a lot of commonalities, and you share these issues on a very deep level.
Absolutely. Chinook, do you have any questions for Karolo?
Yeah. How old is the company?
My organization, it's 21 years old, and I've worked with them for about 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm. And how many buildings do you have across the world, or like, where are you guys?
We have an office in Oakland, California. Our partners have an office in El Salvador, close to the bay, and we work with about 100 different communities and serve over 35,000 people who live in the region.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shinook.
Yeah, thank you.
Freud, do you have any questions?
Oh, hold on, there's one more.
Sorry, one more.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. I have two questions, and my first one is, how did you get interested in El Salvador?
So my academic background is in anthropology, the study of people and society and culture, and I did a lot of work in Guatemala, and actually my family is from Guatemala. So I became interested in working in that region because I felt that a lot of my skills applied to some of the problems, and I was really drawn to the organization and the fact that it's community based and that there's solutions that come from the community. So it wasn't necessarily the country specific, but rather the approach. And as I've developed my relationships in that country and the issues that we're working with, I mean that spirit of collaboration has just grown deeper in me over the years. So yeah, no, thank you. And what was your second question?
My second question is, where do you guys get all of your financial funds if you guys are traveling everywhere and supporting your company?
Yeah, that is a great That's a great question. We are a nonprofit organization. A good portion of our funding comes from foundations, so institutional donors. Most of our funds come from. When I do this presentation to other groups, I say from individual supporters like you. Individual supporters and institutional donors, and we also do trips to the region. So folks will pay to join us on educational travel, and we collect a small fee for that. Yeah, great question.
Okay, now let's go ahead and move over to Freud.
Have you ever tried to desalinate the ocean water?
Sorry, what was that again?
Have you ever tried to desalinate the ocean water?
Yeah, no, desal. That's a really great question. It's an interesting solution. One of the issues around desalination is that it requires huge amounts of energy to be able to separate the salt from the water. One of the other problems is that water flows downstream from higher up to lower down. When you use desalination, you're kind of flipping that process. You've got water coming from the ocean that you need to pump up. So it's a really energy intensive sort of approach to water. So it's probably not the most efficient technology for us to think about using in a place like El Salvador. But that's a great question. There's other countries where they're really using that approach and having some degree of success with it. But there are trade-offs, and one of them is that it's very expensive and it's very energy intensive. But great question.
Wonderful. Okay, let's go to Stanford.
What? I'm doing now?
Sure.
Okay, so after scrolling through some social media, I've seen that Puerto Rico hasn't really got any help, and if they were to get help, it would take like 6 months or something. Do you think that there's there should be more help, or? do you think they're getting any really much help or something?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's one of the things, it's a little bit far afield from where my expertise and knowledge are. I personally have never visited Puerto Rico. However, what I'm getting from the news is that, yeah, they do need aid. They're Americans also, and they happen to be in a U.S. territory rather than as a state. So yeah, I mean, we as a nation have a responsibility to step up. And one of the things that I hear is that there were rules around shipping that prevented ships from going directly to Puerto Rico, that weren't U.S. flagged. So I understand that decision has been reversed, and that now ships can go directly to Puerto Rico and be able to deliver supplies. So that's an interesting development that's happening, and hopefully it'll have a positive effect on the humanitarian crisis that's emerging there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question.
Yeah,
absolutely. And then let's see, Great Falls. Or I'm sorry, Stanford. Was that a hand? Did you have another question?
I don't think so. Nope.
Okay. Great Falls.
Okay. Do you have any plans on expanding?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And actually, one of the things that we're doing right now is we're deepening a relationship with some partners who work in Honduras. So yeah, I mean, there is a little bit of a plan for expansion geographically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great question. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Great Falls. See a hand.
It's on.
It's on.
All right, cool.
I can hear you.
What made you decide to get into the whole business thing?
Into this. Boy, that is a long story, and I think part of it had to do with my experience in Guatemala. Back in 1993, I thought that I wanted to go into academia and be more of an academic, but I started doing my research in Guatemala, and the Civil War was still going on, and what I saw was an emerging humanitarian crisis that was happening during the war and in the aftermath of the war, that I kind of thought, well, what can I do? How can I apply what I've learned to do something about this, and to work in partnership with folks who've been affected by the war and want to rebuild their lives. So part of it was because of a personal experience that I had, and witnessing the effects of war.
Yeah. Well, you guys, we could probably go on for another hour easily with these questions and similarities and conversations, but you have another class to get to. And I know that Karolo has probably another event to get to today in Missoula. So can you please join me really quickly in just thanking Karolo for joining with us, and thank you for those wonderful questions and insights.
Yeah, no, thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed myself with you all. Keep up the great work.
Wonderful questions today. Wonderful insight. Thank you, everybody, and thank you to the Montana World Affairs Council. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.